This week, we will take a look at the magic of Chinese medicine. In this class, we will first get to know the Chinese idea of yin and yang, along with the 5 elements. And after that, viscera and bowels versus channels and collaterals. And then the conception of qi blood. And we will conclude the class with a brief comparison of Chinese and Western ways to treat diseases in the final section, East meets West. Now, let's start from the most important cultural background of Chinese medicine, the idea of yin and yang and the 5 elements. The concept of yin and yang can mean metaphysics to Western people, but most Chinese can tell them at least in specific examples like a man and a woman. Any Chinese can tell that a man represents yang and a woman yin. And then the sun and the moon. Of course, the sun is yang and the moon is yin. Then there are situations more complicated. For instance, inside any single man or woman, there could be lots of pairs of yin and yang. Let's first take the 2 sides of any body, the dorsal and ventral. Which side of yours is yang and which is yin? Actually, our dorsal side is yang and the ventral is yin, quite opposite to what many people may feel. But why? This is easy to explain. Imagine a farmer working in the field. Which side of him should be facing the sun and which side to the earth? Then you can understand. And the next pair is our viscera and bowels. The viscera, like the heart, the lungs, and the liver, are yin, whereas the bowels, like the stomach, the gallbladder, and the intestines, are yang. The yin parts are solid, and they work inwards to collect, store, and raise. The yang parts are hollow and outwards, working to diffuse and release and let out. Yin and yang are a pair like husband and wife. They are about confrontation and integrity, being opposite to each other, but at the same time attracting and going towards each other. This forms a dynamic balance. Balance, that's the key word to our health. Health means the equilibrium of yin and yang, and the overdevelopment of either party might mean the reduction of the other, which leads to imbalance and illnesses. All right, the next highly important concept in Chinese medicine and philosophy is the 5 elements: wood, fire, earth, metal, and water. Everything in the universe is produced by the evolution of the 5 elements and is characterized by them too. The 5 elements have a correspondence with lots of things, such as the seasons, the directions, the climates, the colors, the sounds, the flavors, and body parts, and even our emotions. Look, we have the 5 elements here. Let's start from the wood. It corresponds to the season spring, and the fire to summer, the metal to autumn, and the water to winter. And then what about the earth? Well, there's the 5th season according to the ancient Chinese, the canicula, the period after the summer solstice when the weather is damp and sultry. Now, the 5 elements are also linked to the directions, with wood to the east, the fire to the south, the metal to the west, the water to the north, and the earth to the middle. And the 5 elements versus the human organs, the wood corresponds to the liver, the fire to the heart, the metal to the lung, the water to the kidney, and the earth to the spleen. Now the flavors. The wood corresponds to sour, and the fire to bitter, the metal to pungent, the water to salty, and the earth to sweet. Different flavors also serve different viscera and bowels. Then, what are the interactive relationships between the elements? here we have to introduce the very Chinese notions of producing and checking sequences. Generally speaking, to produce is to help with or contribute to the being or building up of something, like a mother does a son. And to check is to restrict or reduce it, sometimes even to kill it, like what an enemy does. We'll look at the producing sequences first. Let's start from the metal. Who does it produce? It's the water. Why? Just think of what a metal turns into when it melts. Right, liquid. Then the water's son is the wood. This time you can try to think of how water serves trees and other plants. Next, the wood produces fire, which is easy to understand. And what does fire produce? It's the earth. If it doesn't make sense to you, try to imagine things turn to ash in a fire and finally become dirt. And lastly, the earth produces, of course, the metal. Just think where the real metals come from and you will understand. Then the checking sequences. Let's start from the fire. What does the fire check? It checks the metal, obviously because metals can be melted in a fire. Then the metal checks the wood. An axe or knife made from metal can be the tree's enemy, right? Next, the wood checks the earth. Just think how a tree gets into the soil and breaks it. And then the earth checks the water. This explains why we use sandbags to block and stop a flood. And finally, the water checks the fire, which is the easiest to understand. What happens when one element of the five becomes too strong? Well, the one checked by it will become weak. You are reduced if your enemy becomes strong, right? For example, when the wood is strong, it weakens the earth. When this happens in a human body, a strong liver leads to a weakness in the spleen. Such a person has rather bad temper because the liver is related to the emotion of anger and might have a weak digestive system. And what if a certain element is too weak? Well, its son will consequently become weak. So a man who has a weak spleen and stomach often has a weak respiratory system too, with vulnerable lungs or a sensitive nose. He catches a cold easily and he often coughs. So of course, good health means balance among the five elements, with none of them going too strong or too weak. That is harmony inside us. And remember, the producing and checking sequences do not just exist between the five elements, they also go for the five flavors, visceral and bowels, sounds, and so on. With this theory, we can go further in the relationships between the visceral and bowels and the balance of human organs next time. Thank you.